Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the ISV101 session on creating a managed, governed, and secure SaaS foundation on AWS. My name is Vijay Pawar. I'm part of the ISV Solutions Architect group here in AWS. A quick look at the agenda and what we'll be going through. We'll talk through some of the key outcomes and goals that you as a SaaS provider would want to create. So we'll talk through some of the SaaS architecture fundamentals. And then we'll start jumping into some of the services and solutions that are going to help you create this foundation on which you're going to build your application. We'll walk through the setup and how that works. We'll talk to some of the key governance and security aspects of it as well that come along as part of these solutions when you create them. So let's get to what we mean by a SaaS architecture. If I have to define it, at the end of the day, when we look about it, when we talk about SaaS architecture, it's not any one technology. It's not one design pattern, right? It's mainly about a mindset, because that's how you approach creating an environment that you as a SaaS provider would operate and analyze and onboard your end customers, or we call them tenants. And you want to do all of this through a unified experience. One of the key best practices that you want to embed in these architectures is to not do these one-off customizations for, let's say, a single tenant or a bunch of tenants, but rather you want to be able to rapidly onboard new features, update these solutions as a collective whole, right? And the way we can measure this success is through the agility that we would provide to both our internal teams, which will help them innovate faster, as well as to our business teams, so that we can grow our SaaS business in a cost-effective manner. Let's look at the word agility. And it's very key because it's not really a buzzword. We need to be agile across various different aspects of your SaaS architecture and your solution. You need to be agile in onboarding new tenants. So as new customers come on board, you want to make sure that it's a frictionless process. Another key aspect where agility comes into play is you want to make sure that your internal teams, these are your development teams, the product teams that are creating the software, have a chance to innovate faster, so that the cycle times between releases or when you're doing feature updates is really short. You want to make sure that you also provide some capability of tenant customization, as we call it, by providing tiering models. You may have a bronze, silver, and a gold tier for your end customer. And depending on their tier, you're going to get various features enabled to you. And you want to do all of this as part of a unified experience. You really don't want to do this as part of a bespoke way of managing and applying these changes. So at the end, you're going to end up with a blueprint that looks similar to this, where you have your SaaS application architecture. There are many types of tenancies. We'll talk to some of them in some of the next slides. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that your tenants, your end customers, there's complete isolation, right? You don't want any of your tenant one data or attributes to be exchanged with tenant two. But it's not just about the SaaS application itself. There's a whole slew of ecosystem services that you need to consider as part of your entire architecture. One of the key ones is identity. As you build your application, you will soon come to terms with a term called SaaS identity. And this is where it's not just the user identity of who's logging in or who's using a system, but it has an additional context of the tenant. And this is super important because this SaaS identity, which is user as well as tenant, is going to be all pervasive, right? You look at all these other ecosystem services that you're going to be talking about, they all need to be tenant aware. When you create metrics, when you create analytics for how the system is being used, how it's being operated by your end users, they will all be per tenant metrics, right? You want to make sure that the billing and metering accordingly takes place as per tenant costs and tenant metering that you want to do. Let us talk about some of the tenancy models that we can follow as building the SaaS application. we have a tenancy model, which is known as a siloed model. In this specific model, you will notice that none of the resources are shared. So in the case of this, where you have the front-end web application, the UI that your end customer is going to be accessing, the back-end services, the back-end data stores, they're isolated. Each tenant gets their own resource in a way. On the other side of the spectrum is a pooled model. This is where all your resources are shared. The UI that your end customers interact with, the backend services that this UI will be calling, as well as the data sources that are being used are shared resources. It's very important to make sure that your design takes into account the isolation that you would require for across these tenants, right? And then most likely going to end up in the middle. They're like a bridge model where certain services and certain resources will be shared among tenants. This could be your front-end UI, for example, your landing page. But then you may have the back-end services and the back-end stores that are in a siloed mode. So that's kind of a bridge mode between these two tenancies. So no matter which model you choose, there are going to be pros and cons. At the end of the day, the tenancy model you choose, the architecture that you're going to use for your SaaS application is going to be driven by your business decision as well as your workload decision, right? It depends on the type of workload that you're going to be running as part of your application and also what your business drivers are. For a siloed model, we can talk about some of the advantages here. It's, for example, because there are services aligned to each tenant, there are literally no cross-tenant impacts, right? It's a completely partitioned environment. And when your workload has got sensitive requirements around compliance, for example, this is a good model to go with so that you're completely isolating each tenant right from the front end all the way to the back end stores, right? There are some cons to that approach. It's a little bit more complex to manage because of the fact that you're provisioning so many more resources for each tenant. There will be that set of resources and you're going to repeat that. And there's also the factor of cost, right? At the end of the day, you're not going to be sharing resources. So there will be a cost impact in terms of how you are arriving at the margins for a model that is using a siloed model. On the other hand, in a pool model, you get the benefit of cost optimization. Your resources are being shared, and you don't have to kind of provide a complete set of resources for each tenant. And as a result, it's a little bit more simplified in terms of your management as well, so that you can easily manage these resources as there'll be fewer set of resources compared to the siloed mode. But a few cons that have to be considered, right? You want to make sure that there are cross-tenant impacts that are there. We take care of those, making sure that you don't have the noisy neighbor syndrome so that they're impacting each other. And there will be compliance challenges if, for example, the same table is being used across tenants, right? That's something, again, that needs to be managed. So now that we have thought through some of our goals of what our SaaS application needs, as someone who's going to start out building the SaaS application on AWS, I want to make sure that I'm creating the right foundation for this, right? You have your developers now, they're ready to go. They know exactly, how the SaaS application is going to be built, which tenancy model to be used. But then now, how do they start using it? How do they start creating this on AWS? So fundamentally, you'll have to give them an AWS account. And that's the first thing that you would have to do. But the nice part about having an AWS account is to make sure that you also realize that it's an explicit security boundary. What this happens is because it's a resource container for your services, it's a completely explicit security boundary so that in a mode where, let's say you do use the silo approach. In fact, I have a customer who does that in their production workload. Each tenant is actually an account. They provision an account and they provision the tenant in that account just so that they can get that explicit security boundary. Another driver for them is also the fact that it's a very data intensive application as well as latency sensitive. So this kind of works for them. With an AWS account, you can also enforce limits and thresholds as well, right? So that's another advantage of the way the account is used. But then what's going to happen, right? Your first developers come on board. There may be other development teams that may want to start developing. You'll eventually have a development account, a staging account, and then production accounts. That's where you will eventually have the workloads running that your end users will start using. So that's when you're going to scale. And as part of the scaling criteria, you're going to go to a multi-account model, right? And the drivers I've already mentioned. For example, there will be multiple teams that will want to innovate independently of each other. We don't want them impacting each other. So like I mentioned, because of a nice siloed boundary of the account, you can spin up a separate account for different teams, and they operate within that, where they can start up resources or tear down resources as needed without impacting the other teams around them. You may also want to organize your accounts based on various business processes in your organization. There may be various risk profiles that are there for different business processes. For example, your financials group may have a set of guardrails and risk profile that you want to make sure are adhered to, versus your sales and marketing, right? You may have some sales and marketing related workloads that may have a different risk profile, and you may want to manage and operate them independently of these set of accounts. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we get a consolidated bill. And that's where, when you're using a model which is like AWS Organizations, that provides you this capability. This is the first foundational service that I'll talk through, which is going to let you centrally manage and govern your AWS resources while you continue to innovate and scale in the cloud. What are the key benefits of using AWS Organizations? In this, as part of AWS Organizations, you get to centrally provision your accounts and your resources. And this is very helpful, right? Because at the end of the day, you will have these different groups of accounts that you'll organize logically into organizational units. And then you would want to share resources as well as control access to each of them. They could be controlled by account, or it could be controlled by region, or even controlled by services as to what services are enabled in each of these accounts. We talked about costs, right? I want a consolidated bill. I want to be able to use various features within the AWS services to look at my costs and see where best I can optimize in my services out here. So now that you think through all of this, right? I need multiple accounts. I need multiple organizations. I need to make sure I'm auditing all my accounts correctly. I'm sure I'm following my compliance rules or my other risk factors that are there. I want to make sure that I'm doing this correctly and according to best practices. So yes, AWS Organizations will natively allow you to do that. It gives you all the tools to do all the things we talked about. But if you really want to jumpstart your environment, and using a simple UI and the best practices that are embedded in that solution, we would recommend using Control Tower. So what does AWS Control Tower bring to you? Well, it really helps you easily set up, govern a secure multi-account environment. And these are very key. These are very key keywords out here. We want to make sure that the various features of different services are abstracted and presented to you as an administrator with the right management features, right? AWS Control Tower uses the underlying services like Organizations, AWS Config, Single Sign-On, as well as Service Catalog, right? It also implements for you a default account structure. So this is where, when we're talking through which account should I set up, how should I organize them, this provides you a default structure based on best practices on how you can start off your environment on AWS. And this has been growing over the years since we introduced them based on the best practices that we have got from thousands of our customers. We have interacted with them. When we learn of new best practices, we embed them into the solution. You can still continue to natively use AWS Organizations, which is a good thing, because there are other services that you may want to enable using the AWS Organizations features, and that's what we'll talk through. Here are some of the key benefits that the Control Tower brings to you, AWS Control Tower. We have an automated landing zone with the best practice blueprints. So this is where we talk about the organizations, the organization units, and the accounts that you would want to set up with it. It gives you some built-in identity and access management as well. One of the key important benefits is there's a pre-configured log archive and audit to all your accounts. So this is where, for example, when you create a new account and you have a new member account of your organization, it makes sure that you turn on CloudTrail so that all the interactions, API interactions in your account are audited. And all of this is centrally accumulated in a central account so that none of the member accounts can turn off these logs. So there's guardrails around it to make sure that all those governance policies are followed. There's a dashboard that comes along with AWS Control Tower, which really helps you visualize across your entire organization how things are going, how you're monitoring and how you're managing it. We'll walk through some of these capabilities, and as you notice that these capabilities kind of reflect what you saw from the AWS Organizations as well. That's because AWS Control Tower is built on top of AWS Organizations, and it gives you the same capabilities that it'll abstract away from the end user, right? It'll centrally allow you to provision your multi-account environment. Since it uses AWS Organizations, you can get a consolidated bill for the organization, look at other services like Trusted Advisor, like your cost reports at the organizational level to optimize costs and improve on them, right? And the last point is it seamlessly integrates with our AWS security services. So we will talk about it in more detail, but there will be certain services that we'll walk through where you enable them at the organizational level and it applies to all your member accounts, right? And you get to control how that is applied. Let us talk through some of the setup that occurs as part of using AWS Control Tower. Just want to reiterate, it is the easiest way to set up and govern a secure multi-account environment. So this is what is provisioned by AWS Control Tower. We talked about the various aspects of the different organizational units that are required. By default, it creates these two. It's the security organization unit and the sandbox organization unit. And as you can see, Control Tower uses various other services to help you build this multi-account environment, right? It uses the Service Catalog as part of a built-in account factory. So when you see on the right-hand side, when you provision a new account, what happens is that it uses the baselines that are there from a networking perspective, from a services account perspective, and it will provision that account for you using the account factory. It will then apply several guardrails as well that are part of the solution to make sure that you're applying the appropriate policies to all these accounts as they are being provisioned. AWS Control Tower also integrates very well with AWS SSO, which is the single sign-on. In my past interactions with my customers, this has been a major stumbling block because as you create accounts and you have to create users, if you're operating them independently, you have to create roles for them, and then this becomes like a barrier to entry. Oh, I have to create a brand new user. It's going to take its own time to get them provisioned, for example. Well, in this case, if you already have, let's say, an existing IDP or an existing directory that you use for your users, AWS SSO can integrate seamlessly with that. We integrate with third-party IDPs like Azure AD and Ping and Okta. And what this allows you to do is then, because you can synchronize these directories, you can have the users already set up as part of your new AWS organization ready to go, right? We have some pre-configured groups that are there. There are also pre-configured permission sets. So once you give the right permission sets to the users, now you can have federated access across all your accounts in your organization. And that is very important, right? Because that becomes a barrier to entry, like I mentioned, if you don't set this up correctly to prevent this user sprawl and user sync issues that normally take place when you're having disjoint systems. Let's talk a little bit about how you control and govern this environment. I talked about the built-in account factory, and here's a little bit more details on what it does, right? We have a set of defaults that you configure as an administrator, where you would set up the baselines for networking, networking CIDRs that you would require, which regions you want this account to be operating in, which organizational unit is part of. So that's all part of your default baseline that Service Catalog automation would then take and vend a brand new account for you, right? Along with that, Control Tower will apply these guardrails. And these are very important as well, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure there are certain policies which are applicable to your organization, and profiles that you want to create, risk profiles, are applied to each and every account the moment it is created, right? Right from the get-go, you want to make sure that you have a completely governed account, right? You can also set up, as part of this, you can have the users self-service accessing Service Catalog to provision their own services, right, in their accounts. There also, you can control the list of services that are available, for example, to the end user. And that's another way of having some governance created as part of the account creation or subsequent use of the account. So this is a little anecdote where previously when we created Control Tower, it had to be created with a brand new AWS organization. So that is no longer the case. We can now create Control Tower in an existing AWS organization. And what we've also done is there's a lot of collateral that we have around our well-architected framework. We've also published additional white papers on other organizational units that you may want to create as part of a best practice, right? And all of this can now work with your existing, your new Control Tower environment. After you've enabled Control Tower on your organization, the natural thing is to do is you're going to scale this account. You're going to scale the organization. You're going to scale the number of accounts you're going to use. You're going to have many more workloads. If it's in the case of a production workload, you may have many more tenants coming on board. So there could be either many more VPCs that you create or many more accounts. And all of this, you want to make sure that you can monitor and manage across your entire organization, right? You want to make sure that you have all the auditing capabilities that are there. You want to make sure that the resources that you are using within those accounts are configured correctly, as well as having the audit trail on which users are using these various services as well, right? We want to take actions on any of them. If there's some compliance need that you get alerts to, which says, there's some operational issue that needs to be taken care of. You want to be able to operate at scale, right? You want to make sure that you can operate at the level of an organization unit or at the AWS organizations level itself, right? And with the Control Tower, you get this dashboard, which will help you get this continuous visibility into your account, into your multi-account organization. Just want to drill a little bit more on additional governance details, right? When we talked about establishing guardrails, there are two types of guardrails that come into play that AWS Control Tower will apply to your accounts, right? They are the preventative guardrails, and this is established via SCPs, Service Control Policies, where they are mandatory in the sense that they will always be applied, and hence you'll always be compliant. So there's no way around it. Once you've created these policies in place, they're going to get applied, and there's no way you can say I'm not going to be following it. But There are also other types of policies that are known as detective policies, detective guardrails, which are based on config rules. So there could be a specific reason why certain policies are not being followed, and hence these will be flagged. So there could be a chance where when you look at your dashboard, some of the detective guardrails will show up as compliant, but some may show as non-compliant. All the more reason for you to look at in more detail why these non-compliant services or actions are taking place. So as you can see in summary, using AWS Control Tower along with organizations brings a lot of benefits when you're creating your environment on AWS, right? You get to we talk through all these capabilities around centrally being able to provision accounts and managing them, being able to, at an organizational level, kind of in a way dictate how you share resources among them, how do you create guidelines, right? Guardrails. How do you optimize costs across your entire organization? And most importantly, it seamlessly integrates with our AWS security services. I'll talk about a few specific services in a little bit more detail, but these services are what we would call organizational aware, which means that I get to enable them at the AWS organization level, which then means that all my member accounts are then enabled, right? And I get to control that as well. So now that we've talked through Control Tower, the setup for these multi-accounts, let's talk a little bit more on some of the security services that I have seen where our customers right from the get-go would like to use as part of this new multi-account structure that they've created. Within AWS, we have multiple services for security, and I like this classification, how we do that. There are security services that help you identify what the security issues are. We have security services that help you with protection of data. This is protection of data in transit as well as in rest. You will see AWS KMS. That's a service that most likely you're going to be using for protection of data at rest. But then also the networking services that we have to help you protect data in transit, right? There are services to help you detect any types of security issues that you may be having in your environment. Some of them are the Amazon Guard Duty, as well as Amazon Inspector, for example. And when you detect these issues, the key is that you want to be able to respond to them, right? This could be where you want to have an automated way of remediation, or you may also want to have a manual intervention and say, I want to investigate this, right? And not just be able to respond. In certain cases, you may want to be able to recover quickly as well. And we have got services for them as well, where if there was a compromised resource, you want to completely isolate that. You can do your forensic on it to figure out what the root causes are. But then you want to get going as well from a point and recover from a let's say a snapshot or a backup that you had, so that you can get back operationally to a point before the resource was compromised. So let's talk about a few services that will come of great interest for our ISVs. One of them is Amazon Guard Duty. So what exactly is Amazon Guard Duty? Well, it's a threat detection service that uses machine learning to do anomaly detection, and also has integrated threat intelligence to identify and prioritize potential threats, right? A lot of our partners, our ISVs, use EC2 as a key resource. They also use IAM, they use S3, and that's where Guard Duty really shines, because it protects those AWS account workloads and understands what threat levels that could come into play. So how does this work? Well, this is one of the best parts about the Guard Duty setup. It looks at 4 different data sources in order to identify threat levels and threats that come into your resources, right? It looks at the VPC flow logs, it looks at DNS logs, the CloudTrail events, as well as the S3 data plane. And when you set this up, you don't need to individually go and set up, let's say, the CloudTrail logs or set up other VPC flow logs in your accounts. You just need to enable guard duty, right? And that internally will be accessing all these data sources from the backplane, which also helps you from a operational perspective, because there is absolutely no impact to your workload from a performance perspective. You don't have to install agents or other additional software or additional configuration, if you may, to get the benefits of this service. And what it does is then, using threat intelligence, for example, it can give you different types of findings, right? At the end of the day, it'll look at all these sources. It'll do its anomaly detection as well, and then categorizes them into multiple finding types, right? The finding types, for example, could be suspected Bitcoin mining in your accounts that are taking place. There could be some unusual patterns of behavior, and that's also what will show up as a finding. There could be that a user was typically never used a specific, let's say, region in Europe, as now launching instances there, right? That's not a normal behavior that can be flagged, saying, hey, maybe this is worthwhile taking a look at. So what it does is it creates all these findings for you, and then it also categorizes them. It categorizes them high, medium, and low, to make sure that you can pay attention to the severity of these findings. A high finding, priority finding, means that the resource has been compromised. You need to take action right away, right? A yellow finding is where, hey, there's some suspicious behavior here. Probably you should go take a look, because this does not meet your normal pattern of behavior. And in certain cases, it could be just a low finding where the threat was prevented even before the resource was compromised. So it's like an FYI where you can take a look and see what caused that specific finding to appear. When you have all these findings, you want to make sure you can act on them, right? So there are a couple of ways that you can have you act on these various findings provided by guard duty. You can have these findings sent to Amazon Detective. You can have this sent to AWS Security Hub, which is a security aggregator of all your findings for various services there. Or you could have them, or you can use the CloudWatch event triggers to then have this sent to our other third-party partners who also help do some further analysis or remediation of these threats. So how do you kind of go about responding to these findings? And this is what we just talked about, where all the detection is actually taking place in Amazon Guard Duty. We will then have this sent over to security. This is one design pattern. There could be multiple. You have these findings sent over to AWS Security Hub, where we aggregate all these different findings, right? Then we can take selected findings and we can create these events for having either our partner solutions, or you can write your own lambdas, for example, to create this remediation and take action on them to rectify these issues found. So now that we've talked about what Security Hub and how it kind of comes to play, this is the second service that I kind of wanted to talk through, which is also very important when we set up our initial environment, right? So what exactly is Security Hub? So it is our AWS posture management system. As you can see that there are two key aspects to it, and both are important, very important aspects. One is you have all these source finding systems where like Amazon Guard Duty, like we talked about, which is looking at your VPC flow logs and network logs. But we also have other systems like the IAM Access Analyzer or Amazon Macie that are reviewing your workloads, reviewing your resources, and providing all these findings. All these findings can then be aggregated in a single pane of glass. So you get visibility to see the various findings that are coming from these security services, and then you can derive insights by correlating them, right? It's like, hey, from different systems, you're getting different inputs, but there's one single pane of glass now that you can really drive a lot of intelligence from. Another very important aspect of this is the ability to conduct automated security checks. And I've seen all my customers who have enabled this, are very happy with, in terms of making sure that they get this level of capability right out of the box, and in a very easy easy manner, right? There are various security standards that are available as part of the Security Hub, which show up as basically checks and controls that you use. And that's something that also you can enable right through Security Hub. And then after all this, when you've found these actions, you've taken you've drawn your insights, you want to take an action on them, right? And then this is again where you can either take the action within Security Hub itself for some remediation, or there's a complete third-party ecosystem of partners that also integrate very seamlessly with AWS Security Hub for remediation. So how do I enable this? So this is one of the services that is organization aware. So basically, when you enable this at the organizational level, you get to add all your member accounts, right? There's an auto-enable feature where you can enable it on all the member accounts that are there, as well as any future accounts that you may want to create as part of your AWS organization. And that is very important, right? Because you want to make sure that any new account, for example, that gets provisioned also has the right security posture that you want to take with those accounts. This is the part which I was mentioning earlier on, which I thought was very, very important, right? There are some security standards that are very easy to enable and help you, improve your security posture on your accounts, right? There are foundational standards. There's a AWS Foundational Security Best Practices standard that is created by AWS experts, right? There's also the SIS AWS foundations as well as the PCI, and these are very easy. Like you can see on the screen, very easy to enable, and then help you understand your posture because you're going to get a security score. By looking at the security score, you can tell for all those compliance checks that are as part of the standard, how well are you doing compared to what has been recommended as a best practice from a compliance standard. This is the UI that you would see from the AWS Security Hub, where you get to see all the aggregated findings, right? Like I mentioned, there could be multiple source systems feeding these findings. You want to make sure that you can correlate all of them in an insightful way. So you can create your own. There are some built-in insights that come with Security Hub, but then there are also custom insights that you can create to make sure that you are understanding your security posture in a thorough manner, right? And finally, you would take actions, right? In order to remediate some of these findings that you see, and you want to take action on some critical items, you can either do that through custom actions within the Security Hub, or then with our partner solutions, you can have these findings. Maybe you can go to a SIM that you use for your entire other organization as well, and do the analysis and remediation as part of that as well. So here are some of the key steps that we talked through. We talked about how to set up this multi-account environment. You can develop your SaaS application. As part of developing the SaaS application itself, I would recommend, as a partner, please take a look at the partner program called SaaS Factory. This is where you get to engage with solution architects, SaaS experts. They can help you design, they can help you accelerate your SaaS development itself of the application. So please do take a look at that. And then the various services to create your foundation out here on AWS, right? We talked about AWS Organizations. There's Control Tower workshops that can be held at your premises, or at your organization, or multi-customer workshop that take place. We do have activation days, which are very important. We're looking over your shoulder as you create this. As you activate AWS Control Tower. And there are several other key documentation items that I mentioned out here as well, which are part of our well-architected framework as well, to help you manage and govern your multi-account environment. Some more additional links for the security services that I talked through as well, for GuardDuty and Security Hub, that we can take a look at. Thank you.